But the only respect we got from Zuckerberg was,
I have to say, I'm very surprised that more people in the Western tech ecosystem don't realize it.
it's the world's fastest depreciating asset. So
At some point, realize that we're in a way bigger game that we initially imagined.
and we actually licensed it to Facebook at the time when people thought that we're competing. They were using our tech.
It's doable. Obviously, NVIDIA won't be happy with it because they're like price differentiate.
Gamers are not very happy with it because it takes away their GPUs. Welcome to today's episode of Almost Human with Zeev Farbman of Lightricks. Zeev and Lightricks are pioneering in the ability to generate video in real time. More than that, in the episode, I actually learned that they do it on end devices, so they can do real-time video generation on mobile. This is one of the most interesting areas because it moves super fast today. And whoever has the upside or the benefit of creating content on the fly for a specific user by their preferences, that's going to be an enabler for many companies in the coming years. Hey, so AI video generation have been like all the rage. All of us have been doing videos up the wazoo, prompting. Sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. And you just released LTX2 as part of Lightricks. And that's a major shift in how you think, right? As a product company, and we'll speak about that. But if you look at LTX, like why is it such an important release? What would you say? Like why should people take note?
I think there are like a bunch of major technological trends that kind of happened that took us a while to figure out. And I think like this release is like a major data point that might change kind of people perception about a lot of priors in the world of AI. Okay, so let's kind of go over some of them. Imagine that like we're still operating in the world where you have like image model, video models, audio models, like speech models, blah, 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 like a whole lot of these things. Under the hood, like all of them by now, like riding on top of the transformer architecture. And what we kind of start to realize is that if you have like this multimodal model that tackles different modalities, you can derive all these like specific models from it, right? So imagine like internally at some point we realize, okay, there are like these disruptors to doing things, right? Like companies who are like tackling kind of vertical applications, in some sense, is like disrupting the disruptors because besides like LLM and diffusion models, I almost don't see any underlying technology that you need now in order to kind of to build AI applications on top. Another point is that, for example, like a year ago, all of us assumed that, for example, creative like autoregressive generation for real-time use cases, right, where you can constantly generate kind of one latence, like small amount of frames, and for example, navigate in the virtual world is very different than doing like a batch generation, where like generating the whole video. Now we realize that's also not true. Like these two things are converging.
So I think what where founders just miss at this point, it's not about the video looking good, right? It's like it can be generated while watching it, right? In real time, responsive to what the user does, and every pixel is programmable.
Long story short, you're right. What we kind of didn't realize initially that the same architecture can be made kind of autoregressive with kind of a small tweaks. And yeah, it is a big deal because like a year ago, I didn't think, for example, the diffusion models are going to be soon relevant for real-time gaming. I thought they're going to be kind of part of the pipelines where you're creating, like textures, baking in lighting, kind of all these things. I'm kind of, wait a second, if it runs on the consumer hardware and you can make it kind of autoregressive and, that's kind of becomes an appealing experience. Obviously, still there's like a ton of time until it's going to be a viable alternative to a gaming engine like Unreal, but it seems plausible by now.
You just mentioned Google, right? But most of the movement that we're seeing, right, Lightricks is pretty much bleeding edge at this point. You see a lot of movement from the Chinese labs, anywhere from Baidu to Tencent. Right? What was the trigger for everything starting on, and why don't we see as much movement from the American side to what we're seeing on the Chinese side?
At some point in time, it kind of seemed to me that the Chinese realized something about the kind of underlying realities of this tech, and they kind of realized that, okay, this thing is going to be ubiquitous. It's going to be everywhere, like edge devices, data centers, and in order to build kind of a relevant technology, it should be fairly open, right? It's like very hard to see how edge device application can run with APIs. Like it really kind of lends itself to kind of weights being on the device to reduce latency, etc. And a whole lot of them, I think, started to create open models where I think the play is kind of long-term ability to create de facto standards in the industry and over time to capitalize on that. I have to say I'm very surprised that more people in the Western tech ecosystem don't realize it and kind of still try to close the eye behind like walled gardens of the data centers, the API, etc. I think in China at the moment, the most prominent company I would say is like Alibaba, right? They have both great LLMs, right? All this like Quen a series of models which are great, and also kind of really good open diffusion models, including video models that's called Van. So at some point we realized, yeah, that our actually biggest competition are going to be China and not the United States. Somehow Americans still believe that they can close the eye behind, like the walls of the data center, which technologically it seems to me like a kind of a stretch at the moment.
Right. We're actually seeing that most Israeli companies now are building on top of Chinese stack. Now, it doesn't mean that they necessarily use the models, but what most realize is that if you want research, if you want GRPO is a great example. You can have hosted PPO, other forms of reinforcement learning, but GRPO is just almost a de facto standard. I have not seen a single company that is in Israel that is not doing reinforcement learning with GRPO. Is there like stack alignment? Like, is it meaningful, or how are you thinking about if I choose a Chinese stack? How does it determine my future product?
Like this general vicinity of fine-tunable LLMs, which aren't huge. Google are also playing, right? They have like this Gemma series of LLMs and VLLMs. And they're kind of quite appealing. Like we're constantly contrasting like Gemma with, Quens of the world. And they're actually, I think, like Google are doing kind of a really good job. Again, kind of long term to me, it seems that Chinese are realize that having LLMs, like foundational pieces of technology, uh, releasing them for free over time can give you like a very significant moat, right? Because you're kind of shaping the technological river, and then you can do considerations like, okay, working with hardware vendors, and I determine with them like, parameter size, like VRAM requirements, blah, blah, blah. So to me, it seems like, and again, maybe I'm just complimenting it too much. To me, it seems there is like some kind of long-term thinking there that really longer term that the time horizon that you see in the West, right? Because here kind of, okay, seems like again, with this cycle that we kind of poured a lot of money in AI, we kind of expect to see a whole lot of it coming back in 2-3 years, where I think like the analogy to 90s and internet is clear, right? All the geeks in the
Yeah.
90s understood that, okay, internet is going to be a thing. At some point, we're going to play games over the internet to communicate and a ton of other things. It just might not happen in 2-3 years, right? So I think like Chinese maybe, again, hope I don't give them too much credit, understand this reality, just like want to be sure that the underlying tech is created there.
So you're in a pretty unique position, right? Lightricks is a product company. Most, if you look at labs, right, it's building a platform without the killer app has always been a challenge, right? But as a product first company, how did you get to here where you're releasing APIs, you're becoming a platform? Like, how you think, like, what made you, what drove you there?
What we discovered over time is that there are no niches in foundational models, at least at the moment. Because like what we thought that, okay, we're doing efficient models. No, 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 it doesn't work like that. You have a behemoth model, you can distill to model as small as you want, and it's still better than just, like train the small model from the get-go. These things weren't clear to us. So at some point realized that we're in a way bigger game that we initially imagined. And the silver lining is that companies that in the West that are doing multimodal models like OpenAI or Google, they decided to go API and kind of closed route, and we decided to go an open route. But in terms of a shift in the company culture, it's obviously huge. So we already kind of decided to restructure company into kind of two divisions. One that tackles kind of our existing mobile business, and one is around the new business. But even like in LTX, in AI business, really don't believe that technology itself is a long-term differentiator, right?
Yeah,
Because we're talking
no
here
question.
in the end of the day about like applied math. Your researchers are going to conference, meeting other researchers, like the whole thing diffuses like pretty quickly. So what we do think is going to happen is that every technology is going to hit certain limits, right? That in order to overcome these limits, you'll need to productize something, which basically means bringing like human kind of interaction in order to overcome the limitation of the machine. So that's the reason that even in LTX, we decided that, okay, we're building the stack of foundational modeling where the business model is licensing, on top of that API, and on top of that, our internal products where we kind of want to find these places where there are some inherent limitations to the tech and then start to productize like these gaps.
That's a really interesting observation. If I look at, you know, foundation models, it's the world's fastest depreciating asset. So you train it, and then within a year, someone else, or a year maybe, right, 6 months more probably, someone else has capabilities, so you need to retrain. And the direction you are going really reminds me 15 years back at face.com, we had a face recognition API, but the only time, and we actually licensed it to Facebook at the time when people thought that we're competing, they were using our tech. But the only respect we got from Zuckerberg was when we released the application called Click that took the extreme capabilities that were not there. There were the almost, exactly as you say. The opportunity is you understand the model best, right? So you know where the structural limitations are, and you can build a product that works with the model today, not where it will be in 2 years. But at that same time, for the first time, you'll be licensing the API to effectively your competitors, right? It can be Adobe, it can be Microsoft, it can be Meta, it can be anyone, but it's those that are building apps as well. So how does this tension? You have unique capabilities in understanding your own model, but now you're also providing access to it to others.
I completely agree with you that there's like this magical point where your understanding of the foundational tech meets its limitations, and that's what you should find. And I kind of already see that it's unfolding in the world of LLMs, right? We're seeing that, well, like these two major use cases, like search and coding, that everyone kind of realizes, yeah, that's a huge thing, and there's like a lot of productization to be done there. And although some people are still promising a singularity next year, for whatever reason, they also like put a whole lot of effort to productize the things that you can ask yourself, wait a second, guys, if there's like a singularity, why we need to overcome the limitations with, like for
Scaffolding, like why?
exactly.
Yeah,
But I think like we realize by now that the singularity might not come next year, and we need to figure out the limitations of the tech, and these companies are doing it about like licensing to your competitors or perceived competitors. When I think about what we're doing, I always think like about the analogy of gaming engine, right?
hmm
Because okay, there's like some kind of rendering core that initially is very important. So that's like the model, but
DirectX, OpenGL of the
exactly right.
past.
Like
Yeah,
you in the end of the day, you need to kind of render something and whatever. But like over time, like the rendering is kind of always because commodity is like a very smart piece of tech, but doesn't matter how smart it is, it's replicable. There's like entire ecosystem of tools around and the community around kind of gaming engine. And then also like this company sometimes they build a game, right? And sometimes like this game
like
is
Epic, an Epic,
exactly. Sometimes
Quake,
they
id.
exactly like sometimes the game is extremely successful. Like maybe Fortnite now is like really a huge driver of Epic's revenues, etc. But it's still
It all proves out the engine, right?
yeah. So I kind of feel about our kind of product layer and licensing etc. In the same way. In the end of the day, we want to build the engine. The model is like this kind of rendering core. It's very important. It's not the most important thing. What you wanted to do, like over time, is to create like this scaffolding that will allow developers to build applications really easily on top of what you're offering. And then you obviously can kind of build your own stuff, and maybe the stuff you're building is going to be competitive what other people are building on top of your model, like the same way that I don't know, like in the FPS genre, people are doing like Fortnite clones, etc. Frankly, it's not a huge concern, and being in a position when you can kind of get like really deeply inside your model and address the needs of beginners, I think it's a unique position to have.
Yeah, though, like I don't envy you at the first discussion internally if one of your product groups is saying, well, you're actually enabling my competitor, so is bidding against me in the marketplace, right? And some applications can be pretty minimal. Some applications can be meaningful. It can be an ex Lightricks guy that left and is now building a Lightricks competitor on top of your APIs.
For sure. So listen, like at the moment, what I told the guys is that a LTX studio, okay, like I mean, it grew like really nicely this year. It's not a huge product yet. And if we want to kind of scale the usage of model quickly, we have to do it through companies that already have like a very solid distribution, right?
Okay.
So if someone is coming to me and saying, listen, we're gonna do avatars, right? And like inside Lightricks, but we already have like companies that are doing it like really at scale in different domains, etc. Licensing the tech in the best possible and convenient ways to the people who already have the distribution is going to be a priority, right?
So it's
Because
like AWS for Amazon in that sense. Like it's actually a business that enables a different part of their business, but it's super profitable potentially by itself. But Amazon is still in the business of selling you stuff. By the way, other grocers don't want you to use AWS, which is interesting, but Amazon by itself, they're also a core tenant. So they provide demand on top of AWS, and the excess demand can be sold. But
there's like, if you just like think about like the scale of opportunity here and what we discussed about like the technological stack of the future, etc. As much as like a single application can be exciting, and it is super exciting. Listen, like I love what we're doing with LTX Studio. It's great. Trying to create like a gaming engine is a different thing, right? Like,
Mhm.
like even from a kind of computer graphic geeks perspective, it's fun, but you're like investing a whole lot of effort into kind of particular details of specific game, which is like some people's idea of fun. But like building something kind of more infrastructural, like a piece that other people use to build their stuff, it's really as kind of another layer of excitement, right? Like,
No, I think you'll be struggling over time as to vertical integration. Like, how high will you go? Like, should you provide just the underlying API? Should you build a game engine? Should you build, right? Because margin is actually the higher you're up in the stack, the margin is better, and also your understanding of your capabilities is better.
so, with that, I agree. I almost like feel that again, like the foundational piece itself that everyone is talking about at the moment is going to be commoditized really quickly, and also the increments in quality is going to plateau over time. And I don't think like this time is like that far away in the future. And then the game is going to be around actually like the tooling around it, right? Because at the moment, like diffusion models create like really kind of cool results, but everyone is still kind of struggling and kind of taming them,
Mhm.
creating exactly what they want. And I think like the next frontier is clearly there, right? Because in terms of the fidelity of the visuals, they're like above and beyond of what like rendering engines or like gaming engine can produce. But in terms of controllability, they're nowhere near of what
Let's
like
let's let's talk about that in a second. I think actually it's a great segue to what opportunities the platform actually allows, like the change of technology, things that wouldn't work a year ago. And some of them are, yeah, obviously you can build a new epic games game engine. But even if you look at an industry as big as advertising, right? If you could now have a specific creative per impression optimized for the context of the user with a generated media, right? That sounds great, and ad tech actually buying it is two different things. Have you had discussions that are starting to articulate like what's a video generated on a per user basis? Like what's is it possible? Do you already have customers or prospects interested with it?
this specific use case about like tailoring advertisements and the level we couldn't do before is like one of these great examples of what will emerge when we have LLMs and diffusion models working together and making in the real time considerations that before that were like reserved to human marketeers, for example, right? Because a whole lot of these considerations. Okay, I'm like starting to run a campaign and like seeing some impressions, and I want kind of to tweak things a little bit. And now like the cycle is still kind of pretty elaborated, right? Okay, I'm running a campaign and I'm seeing some kind of feedback. I'm going to my creative team. They're like updating the assets. So we're talking maybe about doesn't have to let's say it's like very agile team. So in the same day they can maybe like update
But it
the
will never be with that structure on a per user basis,
exactly.
right? They
Exactly.
can at most run multiple campaigns, have many creative.
Right. So you already kind of imagine how you're
So it's a
giving.
step function in that sense, right? It's like it's a capability that didn't exist before,
I agree. Like
regardless of speed.
LLMs are clearly capable of making most of these considerations, right? Like figuring out according to the audience feedback what might be changed and like, like the assets updated, and it can be on per use basis. And a diffusion models are getting to a point where if LLM explain to them what needs to change, it can change, right? So
Mhm.
let's take like the most basic example. I don't know, we're like advertising like t-shirts and we're like running with some audience, and we now want you like to see what happens when we change the color of the t-shirt, right? So diffusion models these days are capable enough to take exactly like the video that you have and just to change the t-shirt, and obviously kind of things way above and beyond. But it's like for me, maybe like the salient point here is that we kind of realize that LLMs making high level considerations and working with diffusion models on creating assets at the speed we couldn't imagine before unlocking new things, right? And like you we kind of started like with this use case for advertisers of creating like personalized advertisement on the fly, but we can think about maybe even bigger changes like to the entertainment industry, right? And like
Absolutely.
yeah.
Advertising is just an immediate business because if you can prove uplift on the ROAS, you will have technology shift. Now, the technology will be leveraged. While if you look at kind of entertainment, is just a process, right? Because there's a lot of creativity there. So what I'd push back on is it goes back to company structure. Right? It's like you now divided this to the app group and the platform group. But the question is, if you think of structuring the company, is there an enablement group that should be there that takes on, hey, advertising will change. Here are the things in the stack that we need to prove out. We want to show an uplift. And by showing it, right, if you build it, they will come, never works. But if you show what's possible, it can. Now, as a CEO, that's a stretch already having two groups. Um,
Long story short, like it's like a big conceptual problem what you mentioned, because you kind of realize, okay, there are like a ton of different use cases, right, for the model, and some of them like very exciting technologically, some of them are almost like personally exciting, right, because these are like kind of the things that you like
game
to do.
geeks, right?
Some of them just like huge markets, and then it's a challenge that we kind of trying to figure out at the moment. What's like even like you mentioned the API. Okay, what's the right API that both kind of minimal and expensive enough for people to build a lot of things on top of it, right? And frankly, I can't. It is a challenge, even like when you're talking about like 3D engines, right? And
Personal love.
these guys are, and like now I talk to a lot of them, kind of realize, okay, diffusion models just like do global illumination better. So in the end, you're just like getting prettier visuals, faster and cheaper, etc. But they have like existing pipelines, and some of them are fairly different. And it's almost like hard to bet on like one customer because you kind of never know, right? So you want to have something that kind of generic enough for a lot of people to try it. So it's kind of the same challenge with your specific example of advertisement industry. It's like really, really high level. The way I think about it is like what we realize now is that like this multimodal diffusion model, they work best with very capable LLMs.
Hmm.
Kind of that kind of
Makes sense.
spell out things for them. Like initially, like when people train diffusion models, they took like this alt text on the internet, right? And that was like the text encoding, and then but that's not how we do this thing at the moment. Like the captioner part became immense. It's like this huge JSON file that describes kind of the scene with a crazy amount of details. And then when you want to use the diffusion model, right, that's like the best way to provide input to it is using like LLMs that are capable to provide such a structured input. And then you kind of realize, wait a second, the way we thought about like APIs in the past is a little bit of obsolete, right? Because when we think about API, you want to give us like very kind of focused functionality that people get their head around. That's kind of both compact on the other side, give like a big span of capabilities. And now I can just like, give you an example that we're like really have a problem at the moment, right? We're gonna like release a feature that allows you to take an existing video and just like say, okay, here you can just like change stuff, right? Like the person instead of sitting can stand up and go down. And then you kind of realize even like this thing, there are like a bunch of different functionalities there than from the common user, like kind of same, right? Because some user can say, listen, I just like want everything to be the same, but a new object to enter the scene, right?
Mhm.
So other people can say, listen, I want just like to, and there are like 4 different technological rendering rounds that kind of get there. And you kind of start to realize maybe that the best way to tackle it is just to be on another level of abstraction where the user is actually gives like a director level instruction in
Mhm.
kind of a human language. And then the LLM is tuned to create like this structured input to the model that can be even kind of multi-shot and not a zero shot, right? Because imagine that, I don't know, like instructions that create a trailer. Then someone need to explain the diffusion model that you're going to create like a bunch of clips with a different duration, where like one on conditioned another, and it should have like a hard cuts, right? So
Wait, so it means that it's you're basically saying, how do we target less technical audiences, or how do I achieve more control by having an LLM provide ongoing feedback? Like if I'm a creator, you mentioned before in entertainment being a potentially a very large business, right? I'm not a director, right? I don't think that way. So for a creator, if you look at the delta between where you are now or the industry is now and a TikTok influencer that wants to use the technology for something in their primary workflow, is that what's required?
as a technical animator or like 3D modeler or whatever, you basically need to give like this structured JSON by yourself by moving like a ton of sliders, right? Because like these rendering models, they just like have like a crazy amount of parameters,
Hyperparameters, yeah.
right? So I think like what's going to happen over time is that again, LLMs are changing how we interact with machines. So they will be able to speak with you at your level, right? And the level, the language that the animator speaks is different than the language of director, than the language of the executive who kind of runs the whole projects, etc. And I think what's going to happen is that LLMs will be able to translate it to kind of a structured input that can, make the whole machinery work. And obviously, there are going to be some people who can get lower and lower to the level of abstraction, right?
Yeah.
So, but
Like
it's
assembly programming.
right that it's going to be, it's imagine, right? Like classically in computer 3D graphics, we are constantly having like this problem of a blank page. We're like opening like a Blender or Maya 3D Studio, and we're like staring at a blank page. And in order to create something, you needed to invest a ton of effort, right?
Mhm.
Like to create some kind of scene. So we are like really working kind of in the bottom up paradigm where we're just like, okay, pieces, we're like assembling together and the scene is sending. Yet it's extremely hard. Just like most people can't like create this way. Like I think like with diffusion models LLM, we're gonna see something kind of slightly different. You never have like a blank page. You just like imagine something, you get something, right? And then it's like really top-down approach where you can tweak things more and more and more. So sometimes when kind of discussing this thing internally, I'm saying, listen, guys, like we need to get to a point where if the person requires, like the human who is working with the system, they need to be able to change every pixel in the output.
But
Okay.
here, this is you referred to it before. How controllable is the model? Right? It's like amazing output, but repeatability and controllability. Right? Where are we now? Where do you think we'll be in a year?
Uh, there's like, I think what, just like want to understand, when you're saying repeatability, you're talking about the ability to create a consistent world characters that you can revisit, right? So it's not
No,
kind of
3
change.
months after, still, I'm actually building a brand. I'm building a character that I can then maintain over time and introduce to different videos. Yeah, that's like the epitome of where we want to go, right? It becomes an CAA type. We'll talk about types of businesses, but
I just like had a conversation with Professor Danny Koinor from Tel Aviv
Lviv, yeah.
University. He was like in my PhD advisory committee, and asked him recently, Danny, what excites you these days? Like, what do you think is going to happen next? So basically, the same question you're asking me. And he told me recently, I think the low-hanging fruits that we have in computer graphics community in the last 5 years, it's not going to be that anymore. I think the game is going to be exactly around that, like creative control, right? How we, give all this like what creative people require to tweak whatever they want. And another point is consistency, right? So in terms of the control, I think a lot of I don't want to say it's kind of a solved problem, but like the basic modalities, right? How you kind of think about tweaking things and providing hits and input to the system, I think we're already in a good shape. For consistency, it's a tougher problem, especially when we're talking about kind of like this virtual worlds, right? Imagine you're like creating like 10 seconds of video, okay? That's already kind of a lot of tokens. And now you want to keep being this world. But now you need like to condition the generation on all the tokens that you already generated, right? Because you want to consistency and like the attention, like this component that runs in this model is like it's intrinsically quadratic. Like, okay, we are trying to linearize it, right? So we're trying to say, well, not all the tokens need to talk to all the tokens. It kind of feels to me that there are like two trains of thought there. Some people are trying again to create like explicit schemes of how you like package the context. And other people are saying, wait a second, guys, it's like a bitter lesson. We need to figure out, like the machine need to figure out, like do some kind of loss function. What's the right way to package a context?
You mentioned quadratic, and that directly pushes us towards the business models and cost structure, right? And I think the episode won't be complete unless we actually talk about explicits, right? So generating live video, compute intensive, generating live video with an attention model, hugely expensive. Hey, what's the cost structure? So if what's a cost envelope? If I think of 24, 30 FPS at 720p, like what would be what business models can be enabled? Because if it costs me $10 to create a video, it drives what opportunities exist.
So
How expensive is it?
So there's like TLDR that it's not expensive at all, meaning that it can run on edge devices. And I think at the moment, people have like this wrong perception of like Sora or Veo or LTX level visuals can only run on kind of enterprise grade hardware, and it's just like plain wrong. Okay, it can run on your, like gaming
That's
GPU.
huge.
Like a lot of people, when I think about AI, they think about the scaling laws, right? Like what happens when you scale the amount of data, like in the compute and the number of parameters. And I think a lot of people have like this assumption that it's gonna just like keep going up, but I don't think that's. And this thing is obviously is expensive, right? You increase the number of parameters, you increase the amount of data, the amount of compute. The whole thing is becoming more expensive, both for training and inference. But I kind of feel that we're starting to hit a plateau there. Okay, we're not seeing like this crazy parameter increase in the dense models like we saw before. We are like, I think by now mostly working with a mixture of experts that are like kind of easier to train and they're not as compute hungry, etc. So we're seeing a certain plateau there. I don't think like the costs of training the models are going up.
Training aside, like inference, because I'm thinking of
Right.
building advertisement business or a creator video generator or a new version of Epic Games game engine. So it's mostly inference. Like what's the cost structure on per frame or per second basis? Like what should I assume as an entrepreneur?
Right. Just like, but in our trajectory, that just like need to kind of describe in order to answer this question is that both the training and inference cost will also go down over time for the same architecture.
Yeah.
So like there is like some people having like this benchmark of how much it costs to retrain GPT-2 or GPT-3 or like this level of architecture. And the same thing existed for a while in the world of diffusion models, where initially like the grant that Emad gave to train stability 1.4, 1.5 was on the ballpark of $1 million. Maybe it was like $600,000. And we got to a point, I think, less activity there, but people were able to show that you can retrain the whole thing from scratch at like in $10,000, right? So we have like this another trajectory of making things way more efficient than the past, right? So for example, with LTX2, imagine like the level of visuals is way above what you saw in the models a year ago. Like think about like Runway Gen 3 or something like that. And a lot of people back then assumed that there is no way that Gen 3 is going to run on consumer hardware. LTX2, although it like looks way better and it's a multi-model, will run. So we're seeing like a significant kind of reduction in costs. So again, like once you're talking about like edge devices, like how much electricity is going to be, well, not that far away from the electricity that you're spending on games at the moment. Yeah, it like definitely heats up the battery of your smartphone, but it's doable. And that to me is like a really kind of big shift that people didn't notice yet, because everyone is operating under the assumption that we need all these big data centers. And maybe we will need them because someone will show another breakthrough in the architecture that going to increase like the size of parameters so much that we'll have to go back to enterprise deployments. But actually, like with LTX2, that's like one of the things that we're claiming to. Listen, guys, you can have state-of-the-art visual on consumer hardware.
That's amazing. I think that coming into this conversation, that's the biggest difference, because edge device versus centralized data center. Also, most importantly, there are actual products out there, let's say by Google, where they saved $1 billion a year because they run code on edge devices. And so I think people don't fully understand how important it is to push costs down towards the user.
Exactly. And listen, even here is like this point that perhaps kind of worth discussing. The limitation that we have on the edge devices, let's say like gamer GPUs, they're less around compute. They're more
memory.
more about VRAM, and VRAM isn't terribly expensive. You already like saw some people in China taking like NVIDIA 4090, like doubling the amount of memory, like sticking our chip, like hacking the BIOS and like selling, obviously like very much against terms
And
of
just
use.
burning it. Yeah.
Exactly. But it's doable.
Yeah.
Obviously, NVIDIA won't be happy with it because they're like price differentiate.
Gamers are not very happy with it because it takes away their GPUs. So one of my favorite questions, I was looking forward to hear your take, is if you just had $3 million to seed a new startup, you have access to LTX2, and you have the time and availability to actually build a startup, what would you start?
I reread recently a book by Neil Stephenson, like Diamond Age, right?
Yeah.
And I read it, I think, like early 90s, like the first time. Like one of the premises of the book, that there is like this primer, like this almost like an iPad-like thing with artificial intelligence that falls into the hands of three girls from a very different layers of the society, and then like this AI kind of helps them grow up. And you kind of think like, wait a second, all the pieces are there, you know? Like it's actually plausible to build something like that, and it's also one of these cool things that it's fun to build for yourself.
Yeah.
Like when I'm thinking about like this conversation with Danny Cohen, and Danny is like the guy who collaborated with a ton of people like, across the world. He's like, I think one of the first people in Israel who started to collaborate heavily with Chinese academia and still have like students in his lab from there. He told me, listen, one of the things that I'm most excited about at the moment is just like quietly work myself with GPT. It is a magical piece of tech that allows you, if you want, to learn on the level we couldn't before, right? Like imagine that since I started startups, I didn't have like the privilege to work with the guys on the level of my PhD advisors. And I'm kind of missing that, because from them you learn things and okay, you can figure out yourself. Like you just like need, at least in my case, someone kind of to hold your hand and to show this and that. And LLMs are kind of getting there, and you kind of think, wait a second, I actually can create like this new generation of teachers that's going to be extremely appealing. So to me, it sounds like a kind of really cool and fun idea, and the pieces are
Ender's
there.
Game. Yeah. It's like being able to teach, not necessarily to fight aliens.
Thank you. It was fun. Toda rabba.
Diffusion models are not interesting per se for a consumer, right? What you're interested with is, can I create a video that is as I dream, as I type, as I write the specific prompt? And diffusion models are the only way to do that at scale in real time. If you have guest recommendations that you want us to take note of, just email almosthuman@aleph.vc. We'd love to hear from you. I'm Eden Shochat. Thanks for listening. See you next time.